Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video I want to continue talking about my recent reads, but specifically in this video I want to talk about some audiobooks that I've listened to recently. Realistically this spans across the past like 6 months, I want to say, maybe 5 or 4 months, but I thought I'd take the time to share with you some audiobooks and talk about them, talk about the books specifically related to the audio version of them, obviously, as well as talking about the content and the plot, which is all the same across any of its formats. So the first one I'm going to start with is The Dinner Guest by B.P. Walters. I actually read this for my book club. I ended up listening to this on audio because I really wanted to make use of my Scribd subscription. I last year and the year before made such good use of it because I was listening to all the Agatha Christie books, but like lately I found that audiobooks isn't something I naturally gravitate towards, so I am paying for the subscription and then like not using it. So I was like, let me see if they have it on there. They did. I listened to it. I actually found that this was a really good way to enjoy this story, and I think perhaps had I actually not listened to the audiobook, I don't think I would have given the book as the rating that I gave it. And that rating was 3 stars. I just had to get some clarity on that. So this book is such an interesting one because it is a thriller mystery book, and usually I would kind of just like stay away from it, but I think it had a really good like sort of plot twist that I didn't see coming, which if I thought about it a little bit more perhaps I would have, but I'm actually glad I didn't, because then it would have made the book like less enjoyable for me. The thing about this book and its blurbing is that it's really quite odd. I feel like the blurb describes like a very small section of the book and in a way kind of misrepresents what the book is about. I have the blurb here. It says 4 people walked into the dining room that night, one would never leave. Matthew, the perfect husband, Titus, the perfect son, Charlie, the perfect delusion, Rachel, the perfect stranger. Charlie didn't want her at book club, Matthew wouldn't listen. And that's how Charlie finds himself slumped beside his husband's body, their son silently sitting at the dinner table while Rachel calls 999, the bloody knife still gripped in her hand. The thing about this blurb, to me, it sets it up for you to think that actually the setting of the book is going to be like in this room, you're going to hear a lot about the book club, and it's going to be about like sort of that night and like what were the actions leading up to that night. And when I say actions leading up to it, I mean the actions on that night. This book does none of that. This book has such a wider scope, wider setting. This book is actually told from the perspective of Charlie, and it is his voice that you hear the most in the audiobook. And then we also have Rachel's voice. Now, one thing I liked about the audiobook specifically is Rachel is from somewhere in the north of England, and Charlie is from London, I believe, or at least kind of the rural surrounding posher areas. So they had a northern active voice, Rachel, which was really nice, and then I guess any person with some sort of balanced Middle England accent do Charlie. So this book definitely, it starts off with us talking about like Charlie and Matthew and how they got together. They are a gay couple and they have their son Titus. And throughout the story you sort of find out how they came to get their son Titus. Meanwhile, you're finding out about Rachel. So Rachel is living somewhere in the north of England, ends up moving to London, ends up bumping into these guys in like Waitrose of all places, and Charlie invites her to the book club. No, Matthew invites her to the book club, which Charlie is absolutely against because, you know, he just wants to keep his book club for his rich people and stuff like that. I mean, there are just like so many like different plot points to this story. I feel like it tried to tackle a lot. It really tried to tackle a lot about like class, in the sense that Charlie and Matthew are very like, I wouldn't even say middle class, maybe they are middle class, like my sense of like how rich people have to be in different brackets is like, it's not there because I ain't there. So they have a lot of money basically, and Rachel doesn't have a lot of money, and the people that they surround themselves with and the people that are in their book club also have a lot of money. You're the kind of people that have companies and maybe like go there every once so often and do work because they need something to fulfill their time, not because they need the income. So there's a lot in there talking about like class and what it is like to, you know, not have a lot of money, what it is like mingling with other people that don't have as much money as you. Some parts of this book are so insulting. You're reading it and you're just like, what? And I don't know if the author himself comes from a lot of money and is just imagining this is what rich people talk about, because the amount of times that rich people talk about like poor people who don't even have as much money as them is insane. I'm like, why do y'all spend so much time talking about us? Like, that's so fucking weird. So I don't know how true that is, but whatever. And then there's a lot of things to do with the fact of Titan, this son, which I think is such a fucking funny name, which if you read the book, you'll understand why it's so funny, because of the background we later find out that Titan comes from. I just think the name is absolutely hilarious. But there are things said about Titan about how he's the perfect son. He gets up to like make bread. He like chooses organic ingredients, and it just really is, you know, him leaning into that wealthy lifestyle. So much said about Titan in terms of how good he is at like basically everything. And then there's things in there to do with like Instagram culture. So I believe it is Charlie, no, it's Charlie. He's like an influencer in some sense, and that's how the book starts off. But throughout the rest of the book you don't really hear much about it, but again there's lots of commentary on things like that. There's so much commentary and so many aspects of like life in general that it was quite hard to like pin down what this book was about. But the main thread that's running through it is the alternating chapters between Charlie and Rachel, and sort of finding out why Rachel is getting close to this family and what she wants. And you know, you quickly find out who it's about, but you don't find out in what capacity she knows this person. And that's kind of the mystery. And then obviously you've got the mystery of what happened that night. And there's just so much tied into this book that I thought it makes it a little bit more than your usual murder mystery, because it has a lot of commentary on wealth and just like hidden secrets and the things people are doing. There are so many hidden secrets here that I'm just like, whoa, like when this stuff gets revealed, I'm just like, this is blowing my head. Like, why are these people doing these things? He's doing that, she's doing that, and all these things from people's past are just coming back to bite them. So yeah, the thing about Matthew being the perfect husband is one of the things that you just know ain't true. Just gonna tell you now, ain't true. But yeah, so it gets to the end and you have the reveal of, I guess, who is the actual murderer. And I do think it was a very nice, like, not even double bluff, I feel like this is a triple bluff if you could even get that. So I thought it was actually really well done, but I think I enjoyed it a lot more because I listened to it. I could hear the sort of pain in people's voices, the confusion in people's voices. I liked the addition of the fact that they got a northern actor to actually voice Rachel, so that you could sort of hear not hear the differences between them, because obviously Rachel is a woman and Charlie is a man, but in the aspect of them talking about the aspects of class and the regional differences, it was really nice that they had that nice additional touch. So the next book I'm going to speak about is Living an Orgasmic Life by Jeanette Paillet. The subtitle is Heal Yourself and Awaken Your Pleasure. So again, this was a book that I listened to on Scribd. I just found it on Scribd actually. It's kind of sort of like my related interest of books that I've liked and things that I might be interested in. So I thought, you know what, I'll give it a go. I ended up giving this book 1.5 stars on Storygraph, but it's down as 2 on my Goodreads. This was read by the author, and there is nothing against that. She read it perfectly well, all fine. For this, it simply was a case of the content of the book just wasn't that interesting to me. This book definitely focuses a lot on like cis white women, which is completely fine in my book, in terms of like there is a demographic out there that still needs to know about having orgasms and things like that. And I just felt it was very, I want to say one American, but also very like, I guess, state specific, because a lot of the things that she talked about, a lot of the practices she talks about and working with, I guess, like a sex positive coach or something like that, those are very foreign ideas to me. I don't know if it's the Britishness in me compacted with the Africanness in me, but she is, I guess, a sex coach which she actually does hands-on stuff with her clients. I'm just like, this could not. I feel like I literally was reading this and was just like, this could only happen in America. Because I'm just like, what? So that kind of like blew me away. But the actual content of the book, I don't know that I found that helpful. I mean, there are some things that I took away which maybe they have been quite helpful, but majority, I'm like, I took away maybe 1 or 2 things, and I'm like, the majority, I'm just like, I don't know that this book was in any way, shape or form helpful to me. And the main reason I say this is because she talks a lot in here about women who have been married and then women who get divorced, or who get divorced, and so it's about the sort of like repression of these women's sexual urges through their marriages, and like once they come out, like, you know, finding like, you know, that they like their body again, or women who have had babies and how that changes their body and things like that. And I've not experienced any of those things, so for me none of those things were really relevant. I think a lot of the book wanted to talk about the fact that women, you know, get pleasure in a different way than men, you know, how we sort of, what's the word, arouse can be different than men. All of those things still very relevant and true, but then I think when she adds in the other elements of things that I haven't experienced in life, I'm like, well, that's not actually like what I find that some of my issues may be. In the back here, she talks about the fact though, and this is kind of more helpful, that women can be disconnected from their sexuality and explores the reasons, and it says the reasons include shame, body images, sexual abuse, trauma, physical wounding and fears of intimacy. So some of them are applicable, but like when she talks about like physical wounding and stuff like that, she is referring to like, you know, women who get sort of stitched up and stuff after pregnancy, and just like the sort of things that happen with pregnancy, and then other things that I just like, a lot of the book just felt not relevant to me, which isn't her fault, but as a reader, I couldn't relate. A lot of the tips that she really provides, which I think can be helpful if you've kind of forgotten them, but a lot of them really is around like, you know, through sex, making sure that you're kind of aware that your pleasure is kind of like your priority. And I don't mean that like in a selfish way, but it's taking that ownership of, if I want to reach an orgasm, then these are the sort of things I need to do. And really simple things like actually breathing. She talks about the fact that if you hold your breath, that could actually cut you off from having an orgasm. So I found things like that very interesting because I didn't know that, like, you know. But other things, not very interesting. And there's one aspect in here that I really shouldn't laugh, because I'm not trying to shame her in any way, shape or form. I'm so glad that she was very positive, not positive or very open about this. But she talks about an aspect where when she was younger and her dog was looking her down there, and I'm just like, I don't know that I could ever put that out there in the world for people to know, but I'm glad that you're free, that you were able to do that. But I listened to that and I said, excuse me? Okay. And you know, she talks a lot about her upbringing. She talks a lot about like other people's upbringing and how that can, you know, cause sexual repression. There is a lot of like good grounding in here. I just don't know that it got through for me. I found a lot of it to just be like really boring, not very insightful, not very interesting, and not very relevant to me, and that's the reason I gave it 1.5 stars. The next book I want to speak about is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I gave this book 3 stars on Goodreads, 3.5 on Storygraph. I saw this book doing the rounds last year, I believe, and I thought the title was interesting. And as someone with a difficult relationship with their mother, I find it very interesting books talking about people having difficult relationships with their mums, because I think it's one of those topics that is not really widely explored or talked about, and if it is, a lot of people are made to feel shame about that. So especially because I obviously knew, I say obviously knew who she was. I knew she was in iCarly. I've never watched iCarly in my entire life, so I recognised her face, but I couldn't really place her in like anything else. This book is interesting, so she voices it, and the only comment I really have to say in regards to the audiobook version, because there's not really much I feel like I can say in terms of read the audio. I think listen to the audiobook if you like books narrated by the author, because obviously it's going to have like their emotion running through it. I don't know if that's the case for this book. Listening to her read this book, I was just like, was she held at gunpoint to read this book? Could they not have had a voice actor just read this book? She sounded really bored to me when I was listening to this, and it also sounded like I was listening to it on like 1.5 or 2. Like, it's really weird. She managed to speak really fast but also sound bored at the same time. And I was just a bit like, but I don't know how else to explain it. You know, when you speed up what someone is saying, so it kind of, every time they pause, it seems like a more of a harder pause than what it actually is in real life. I don't know how else to explain that. But given the fact that she was an actor, I just found that it was a bit strange that the audiobook, that she sounded bored. And I know voice acting is different to actual acting, but like, I don't know, I thought it would have been better. But hey ho. So going back to the actual contents of the book, I found this book to be so fucking interesting, because I think one of the things we have a hard time with, like maybe it's just people around me or like people in society, is actually people who, like Jeanette McCurdy, had, you know, grown up as childhood stars, have tons of money, moaning about their life. We find it really hard to accept that, you know, these people can have like difficulties in life, or, you know, even if they do, we're just like, well, we've got all the money to get all the help that you want. This is true. Hers was interesting because it was about the fact that actually this wasn't a life that she chose for herself. It was a life that her mum essentially pushed her into. And you hear about, you know, what life was like for her and her brothers and her mum growing up. They sounded like they were actually quite poor. And so this was like kind of like their way out of that. And it was very interesting to hear that even though she was getting money and like booking shows and stuff like that, for a while they were actually still quite poor, which makes sense. Like, you know, if you don't have a lot of money and then all of a sudden you have this influx of money, obviously you're still paying off debt and things like that, but then there's also the aspect that comes with actually managing that money. But anyway, so it's one of those things where you're listening to it and you're kind of like, yeah, but you have tons of money, it's very hard to pull sorry thinking sometimes. But I kind of didn't feel that with this. I kind of felt that you could just, every single time she spoke about aspects of her childhood, that you were just like, this is horrible. So essentially this book is about the fact that, you know, her mum pushed her into being this childhood star, and like all the training and stuff that she had to do, all that was like sort of given up in her life as a child, in order to pursue this dream, how her mum basically led her into her first like eating disorder, or I guess well, she had 2 different eating disorders, so led her into those eating disorders, and just like her mum used to like bathe her until she was like a really old age, which is just bizarre, but then also perform like internal, I guess, like vaginal exams on her. Absolutely freaking bizarre. And she just talks about like what life was like on set, what the like, I guess, realities of like filming some of these things, that like, you know, she was brought up Mormon, I believe. So they were actually quite religious, but then they, as her fame grew, they actually stopped going to church and things like that. But then that sort of aspect of her not knowing much about like men and sex and intimacy and all those sorts of things that just weren't explained to her. And it's actually just how obsessed her mum was with like her being famous and things like that. So that was all very fascinating for me. I did have to like look up iCarly and like all these things and just look at pictures of her and her mum, because I've not seen this woman anywhere. Like, you know, I am aware of who she is. When I saw her picture, I was like, oh, I feel like I know who she is. But it was very interesting to hear the behind the scenes, and very interesting just to hear about that relationship between her and her mum. There's not really much focus on the relationship between her and her dad, and that is explored a little bit more in the book and towards the end, or the relationship between her and her brothers. But she largely just writes about like what it was like between her and her mum, especially how much she idolized her mum, to then later like go to therapy and actually realize like all these things that had happened to her. So it's not really so clear cut as when she was growing up she like hated her mum or anything like that. A lot of this is kind of perspective once she's like looking back. And if you didn't know, her mum passed away. That's not a huge spoiler from the book or anything like that. If you know anything about her, you'll know that her mum passed away this before the book, like I guess way before the book. So again, it's a lot to deal with coming to terms with all of that and not even being able to talk to the person about it. Not that I think she'd get any more sort of closure or anything from that, but it was a very interesting read, because I think it definitely does show you the aspects of look at all these things that she's had, and like look at all these issues she's still facing. So definitely trigger warning in here for so many things that I already mentioned in the beginning, but definitely like trigger warnings for eating disorders, just kind of like sexual kind of trauma kind of things, and just really horrible things said to her as well. The final book that I'm going to speak to you about is one that I absolutely loved, and that is The Pale Horse by Agatha Christie. The Pale Horse is a really nice, separate from all of Agatha Christie's like sort of Marple Poirot series or Tommy and Tuppence, any of those, just like standalone mystery. And it is to do with, so our main character, our narrator, is Mark Easterbrook, and it is to do with the death of a man named Father Gorman, I believe. Let me double check that. Yes, it is to do with a man named Father Gorman, and he dies. But before he dies, he's actually called to visit a woman who says she needs to make a confession. And she says something to him, and then like says a list of names or something like that, and he writes this list of names down, puts it in his shoe, and then shortly after that he is also killed. So when he is killed, this list is found on him, and then we're all trying to backtrack and find out what's going on. For some reason, Mark Easterbrook, and I can't remember it to the connection to, but I think Mark Easterbrook gets essentially pulled into this because I believe the detective on the case is one of his friends who just kind of shares the story with him. And basically I think Mark Easterbrook's name might be on there, or someone he knows, but he basically realises there's a connection between each and every single one of these people on the list. And I liked this as a mystery because I can see it working as a modern day mystery as well as something that worked during that time, so that's why I really liked this. The great thing about this book is that it involves that element of mystery of like who is the murderer, but it also involves an element of the supernatural. So there's an element involved in here which is talking about witches, which is talking about seances, and talking about the fact that, you know, this woman is saying that she has like an item of this person's clothing and you want this person dead, then she can make that happen. And so there is that sort of supernatural element in this book. But then what I like about this, and I'm guessing what Agatha Christie didn't really like about maybe some of the mystery natural novels that were being written at the time, was the explanation of things away with just the supernatural. So I'm guessing she involved this as a kind of joke, but it works really nicely. She weaves it in really nicely amongst the story, amongst what the actual like mystery actually is. Now, I don't want to talk too much about the mystery or anything because it involves a long list of characters, but really Mark Easterbrook and like someone else who joins the story later, they hatch a plan to sort of catch out the killer. What I like about this is whilst it has that supernatural, it involves a very like normal, like logical murder plot at the end, and it's very interesting. Usually in Agatha Christie books, when someone is like killed, it is because it's like for money and all those sorts of things, and you can usually look to the one sole killer. In here we have a list of people who are being killed, but they're like related to each other in some way, but they're not all being killed like by the same person, if that makes sense. So we actually have loads of like little deaths. And yes, some are related to murder, inheritance, all those sorts of things. So we get kind of like a more bigger, juicier mystery. But I thought it was just really cleverly done. There's a really nice way to catch out the killer, the actual elements of who the killer is and what is happening. That's very interesting because I think she delves into another area of kind of like bigger crime, kind of like organised crime, and then that involving that supernatural element. I thought as a narrator, the guy who narrated it did a really good job of like differentiating between different people's voices, but also just kind of like sometimes like impersonating people and things like that was really good. And I just think overall the audiobook was a really nice way to experience this book. Again, for me, I'm not sure reading it that I would have enjoyed it as much. It's the same with like the Dinner Guest. I think the audiobook experience definitely enhanced it for me and made me really like it a lot. So that is it for this recent reads, focusing on audiobooks. I'm definitely going to try for the second half of the year to listen to a lot more audiobooks. I just kind of struggle because I think I have to kind of not even be in the right mind frame. I feel like I really like listening to mystery books via audio for some reason. I don't know why. I just find it really comforting that way, but I'm trying to find the actual right series to do that. But I'll continue searching, putting a lot more effort into it. But let me know if there are any audiobooks that you have listened to recently that you would really recommend, and I will see if I will be able to dig them out. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll catch you in another one. Bye!